For 20 years, the lake was his sanctuary. Then, a new power rose, threatening to sever a legacy. A single padlock became the symbol of a war waged over sacred ground. What happens when an unassuming old man faces an unstoppable force? You won't believe how far one family goes to reclaim what's rightfully theirs. Don't miss what happens next. The morning sun, usually a benevolent painter of the lake's surface, felt like a spotlight on an unfolding injustice. Carter Vaughn, a man whose hands bore the subtle calluses of a life spent building and maintaining the flow of water, stared at the newly erected barrier with a mixture of disbelief and a simmering, cold anger. This wasn't just a fence, it was a declaration of war on 20 years of peaceful existence, on a lifetime of quiet communion with the shimmering expanse of Lake Willow Creek. The bright orange "no trespassing" signs, stark against the natural greens and browns of the lakeside foliage, seemed to mock the very notion of ownership. They hung on a chain-link fence, brand new and aggressively industrial, stretched taut across the very path Carter had used for 2 decades to access his small, privately owned strip of lakefront land. He'd bought it specifically for its uninterrupted access, a small, triangular wedge of earth that allowed him to launch his modest fishing boat, cast a line from the bank, or simply sit and watch the waterfowl. It was a sliver of paradise, meticulously maintained and legally indisputable. Or so he thought. "What is this?" Grandpa Eli's voice, high and edged with confusion, sliced through Carter's stunned silence. The 12-year-old, his fishing rod dangling uselessly, looked up at the imposing fence, then back at Carter's face, searching for an explanation that Carter himself couldn't yet articulate. Their Saturday morning ritual of early fishing, a sacred bond forged over countless sunrises and shared whispered secrets, had been brutally interrupted. The culprit, Carter knew with a sickening certainty, was Janice Collar. The newly elected HOA president was a force of nature, but not the gentle, life-giving kind. Janice was a Category 5 hurricane in a sensible pantsuit, her ambition as boundless as her capacity for control. She had swept into office on a platform of re-envisioning the community, a vague term that, in practice, meant tightening the reins on every aspect of residents' lives, particularly their access to the shared lake. Her rhetoric had been all about enhancing property values and maintaining exclusivity, words that had always grated on Carter's blue-collar sensibilities. He dismissed them as typical HOA bluster, never imagining she would target his own legal right-of-way. The revitalization project, as Janice had grandiosely termed it, had begun with subtle changes, new rules about lawn care, stricter enforcement of parking regulations. Then came the whispers about limiting public access to the lake. The lake, which had always been a common resource, suddenly became a HOA amenity in Janice's lexicon. Carter, ever the pragmatist, had paid little attention. Secure in the knowledge of his deeds and easements, he owned his slice of the shore. How could they possibly bar him from property he rightfully owned? The answer, he now saw, was simple brute force and a breathtaking disregard for legal boundaries. Janice hadn't just put up a fence, she'd put up the fence, a physical manifestation of her unchecked authority. A gauntlet thrown directly at his feet, the lock on the gate, a heavy, commercial-grade padlock, gleamed menacingly. "They can't do this, Eli," Carter finally managed, his voice rougher than he intended. He ran a hand over the cold metal of the fence, the sharp edges of the chain links biting into his fingertips. "This land is mine. It's always been mine." A sleek black SUV, polished to a mirror sheen, pulled up beside them, kicking up a plume of dust. The window rolled down slowly, revealing Janice Collar's perfectly coiffed blonde head, her smile thin and devoid of warmth. Her eyes, usually darting with ambition, now held a glint of smug satisfaction. "Good morning, Mr. Vaughn," she chirped, her voice saccharine sweet, a stark contrast to the steel in her gaze. "I see you've discovered our new beautification project. Isn't it wonderful, so much tidier?" Carter straightened, his posture rigid. "Janice, you know this is my access point. This land here, the small strip leading to the water, is part of my property deed. You can't just block it off." Janice let out a small, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Mr. Vaughn, always so dramatic. We're simply regulating access to the lake. For everyone's safety, of course, and to ensure the integrity of our new Lakefront Heritage Preserve initiative. The HOA owns the surrounding common areas, and we've decided to consolidate all access points through the main recreational facility. This private little pathway of yours is just not conducive to our new aesthetic. And frankly, it's a liability." "Liability, Carter scoffed. "I've owned this access point for 20 years. It's never been a liability." "And what did you mean, consolidate? You've effectively cut me off from my own land." "Technically, Mr. Vaughn," Janice began, her tone hardening, "you own a strip of land adjacent to the lake, which is common HOA property. The access to that strip, the path you're standing on, is also HOA common land. Our legal counsel has reviewed the deeds, and while you have an easement for utilities, there's no explicit public right-of-way for personal recreational access on this specific path. Furthermore, the new regulations, overwhelmingly approved by the board, which I now lead, I might add, dictate that all lake access must be channeled through designated, controlled areas for security and environmental protection." Carter felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He remembered skimming the new regulations in the HOA newsletter. Buried amidst pages of announcements about potlucks and landscaping updates, he dismissed them. Again, as irrelevant to his specific situation, an easement for utilities. That was certainly true. But no explicit right-of-way. It sounded like a legal loophole Janice had meticulously exploited. "So you're telling me," Carter said, his voice dangerously low, "that after 20 years of unobstructed use, after every previous HOA president understood and respected my property rights, you're unilaterally revoking my access based on some obscure interpretation of an easement?" Janice's smile widened, revealing a flash of genuine malice. "Not revoking. Mr. Vaughn, we're reorganizing. You're still welcome to use the main access point down by the clubhouse. It's a lovely walk. Perhaps it will do you some good." She glanced at Eli, a patronizing look on her face. "And it's much safer for children. Don't you think no rogue fishing lines creating hazards?" Eli instinctively stepped closer to Carter, his small hand finding his grandfather's. Carter squeezed it reassuringly, though his own hand trembled slightly with suppressed rage. "This is an abuse of power, Janice," Carter stated, his voice now flat, devoid of emotion, a dangerous calm. "You're targeting me. This has nothing to do with safety or aesthetics. You just want control." "Nonsense," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's about order. Mr. Vaughn, something this community has been sorely lacking. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important meetings. I trust you'll respect the new signage. Any attempts to tamper with the fence or the lock will be considered vandalism and prosecuted accordingly." With that, she rolled up the window, her smile vanishing as quickly as it appeared, and the SUV sped away, leaving Carter and Eli standing in the dust, confronting the harsh reality of their new barrier. Eli looked up at Carter, his eyes wide. "Grandpa, what do we do? We can't fish here anymore." Carter looked at the fence, then at the tranquil lake beyond, then at his grandson's crestfallen face. A lifetime of engineering problems had taught him that every barrier, no matter how formidable, had a weak point, a solution, a way to restore flow. He was a retired hydraulic engineer, a man who understood the fundamental principles of leverage and counterpressure. Janice Collar had made a critical miscalculation. She had assumed an old man, settled in his ways, would simply roll over. She didn't understand the depth of his connection to this land, to this lake, to this tradition with his grandson. A steely resolve hardened his features. "We don't give up. Eli, not ever. This isn't just about fishing anymore. This is about what's right, and we're going to fight for it." He took out his phone, his thumb hovering over the contacts. He knew exactly who to call. Margaret Ruiz, his sharp-witted, equally retired neighbor, a woman who had once been a formidable trial lawyer, was the first person who came to mind. Janice Collar had just picked a fight with the wrong old man, and he knew just the person to help him draw up the battle plans. The conflict had been introduced. The problem was crystal clear, and the opening salvo in what promised to be a protracted, bitter struggle had just been fired. The initial shock of the fence gave way to a calculated fury within Carter. He wasn't one for impulsive outbursts. His mind, honed by decades of solving complex engineering challenges, preferred precise solutions. The phone call to Margaret Ruiz had been brief, direct. "They've put up a fence, Margaret. Blocked my access. Says I don't have a right of way." Margaret's response had been equally succinct. "Bring me your deeds and your patience. This is going to be a long game." The following days were a blur of legal consultations and mounting frustration. Margaret, with her sharp wit and even sharper legal mind, meticulously reviewed Carter's property documents. The good news, Carter's deed clearly stated his ownership of the narrow strip of land leading directly to the lake's edge, a small triangular parcel distinct from the HOA's common areas. The bad news, Janice Collar's legal interpretation, while shaky, wasn't entirely baseless. The easement for utilities was explicit, but the right-of-way for recreational access across the HOA's common path leading to Carter's strip was ambiguous, buried in decades-old HOA covenants that predated many current residents. It hinged on implied use and precedent, which Janice was now aggressively dismantling. "She's exploiting a technicality, Carter," Margaret had explained, pushing her reading glasses up her nose. "The path to your land is HOA common property. You own the destination, but she's controlling the route. It's like owning a house, but the city decides to put a gate across your driveway and claims it's for traffic management. We can argue adverse possession or prescriptive easement based on your 20 years of continuous, open, and notorious use, but that's a lengthy and expensive court battle, and she knows it." The impact of the fence rippled through Carter's quiet life, far beyond the inconvenience of lost fishing trips. Eli, usually ebullient, grew quieter, his small shoulders slumped. He missed their mornings by the water, the easy companionship, the shared joy of a tug on the line. The fence wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a psychological one, separating them from a cherished tradition. Carter felt a profound sense of failure, a helplessness he hadn't experienced since his retirement. He was an engineer, he fixed things, but this wasn't a broken pipe or a faulty pump. This was a human problem, fueled by petty power and legal maneuvering, adding insult to injury. The HOA sent a formal letter, sternly reiterating their new policy and warning Carter against any unauthorized attempts to circumvent established community guidelines. The letter, signed by Janice Collar herself, felt like a slap in the face. It made him feel like a trespasser on his own property, a criminal in his own community. One afternoon, a small silver drone buzzed annoyingly over Carter's backyard. He watched it, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes, as it hovered, then darted, capturing angles of his property, the fence, and even Eli playing catch in the yard. A few days later, a cryptic post appeared on the community's private social media group, a blurry photo of Carter standing near the fence, captioned, "Some residents are struggling with our new vital safety initiatives. Patience and cooperation are key to a harmonious community." The message was clear. Janice was using social media to subtly demonize him, painting him as an obstinate troublemaker. The tension escalated when local police, Officer Dean among them, started patrolling the lake entrance more frequently. Initially, Officer Dean had seemed sympathetic, nodding politely at Carter's explanations. But then, after what Carter suspected was a private conversation with Janice, Dean's demeanor shifted. One morning, as Carter stood near the fence, simply observing, Officer Dean pulled up. "Morning, Mr. Vaughn," Dean said, his voice flat. "Just checking in. Got a few calls about loitering around the new lake barrier." Carter raised an eyebrow. Loitering officer, this is my property. I'm standing on my own land. The fence is on HOA common property. Sir, Dean replied, avoiding eye contact. And the area immediately around it is now restricted. We've been instructed to enforce the new HOA guidelines to prevent any unauthorized access or potential damage. So I can't even stand near the fence on my own land without being accused of loitering. Carter's voice tightened. This is harassment, officer. Pure and simple. Dean shifted uncomfortably. Just doing my job. Mr. Vaughn, the HOA has presented their case, and they have legal counsel supporting their actions. For now, it's a civil matter. But if we get reports of interference with HOA property, it could become criminal. The implication was clear. If Carter so much as touched the fence, he could be arrested. Janice Collar had successfully weaponized the local authorities. At least for now, it was a disheartening blow. Carter felt cornered, the weight of the HOA's institutional power pressing down on him. But then, a flicker of something new began to emerge. Not everyone in the community was buying Janice's narrative. Rick and Dana Hallman, a younger couple who lived across the lake, had witnessed the initial confrontation. Rick, an amateur videographer, had captured the entire exchange on his phone, the one where Janice had smirked and dismissed Carter's concerns. They were quiet, observant people, and something about Janice's self-satisfied cruelty, coupled with Carter's quiet dignity, had bothered them deeply. They began to film more, discreetly documenting the increased police presence, the overly aggressive no trespassing signs, and the general air of hostility emanating from the HOA leadership. They uploaded their footage to a little-known local Facebook group, tagging it with innocuous phrases like #lake life and #community update. The initial response was muted, but then they posted a side-by-side video, one clip of Carter and Eli them fishing peacefully by the lake from years prior, and another of the grim, fenced-off access point with Officer Dean standing guard. The contrast was stark, emotional. Someone shared it, then someone else. The video, stripped of commentary, spoke volumes. The twist came when Carter, in a moment of desperate clarity, remembered a dusty box of old family documents in his attic. He'd inherited his grandfather's meticulously organized papers, a collection of local history, property records, and even old maps of the area from before the community was developed. He spent days poring over them, a desperate hope flickering within him, and then he found it. Not a deed, not an easement, but something far more potent. A faded, hand-drawn plat map dating back to the 1940s, predating the very existence of the HOA. It showed the original subdivisions of the land around Lake Willow Creek, and clearly marked, not as a common path, but as a small, designated parcel, a tiny rectangular plot of land spanning the entire width of the path leading to his lakefront strip, complete with a specific parcel number and a faint, almost illegible signature of sale. This tiny, seemingly insignificant piece of land, containing the very spot where the padlock was now installed, had been sold off to a private entity decades ago, before the HOA was formed and before the common property was designated. It was a forgotten orphan of a land deal, technically outside the HOA's direct common property jurisdiction. Carter's heart hammered. He called Margaret immediately, his voice trembling with excitement. "Margaret, I think I've found it. The key to the kingdom. Not just the right-of-way to my land, but the right-of-way to their gate." Margaret, ever the cautious legal eagle, urged him to bring it over immediately. As she studied the old map, her eyes widened. "Carter," she breathed, "this is incredible, fellow. If this parcel was sold off privately before the HOA formed, and it encompasses the path, then the HOA doesn't own this specific stretch of land where they put the gate. And if they don't own it, they can't put a fence on it." But there was a catch, a significant one. The record of sale for this tiny forgotten parcel was obscure, buried deep in county archives, and it had exchanged hands several times over the decades. always remaining a private holding, never absorbed by the HOA. It technically belonged to someone who might not even know they owned it, or might not care. Who owns it now? Carter asked, his mind racing. Margaret started her research, painstakingly tracing the ownership history of that small, forgotten parcel. The suspense was almost unbearable. Days turned into a week. Then, one evening, Margaret called him, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and triumph. "Carter," she said, "I found the current owner of Parcel 4B, the one that includes the entire length of the path from the road to your lake access, including the exact spot where Janice put her fence and padlock." Carter held his breath. And they're willing to sell it?" Margaret announced, a grin audible in her voice. "For a surprisingly reasonable price. They're an elderly couple who bought it as part of a larger land deal decades ago, forgotten it existed, and were just happy to offload it when I explained the situation." A slow, triumphant smile spread across Carter's face. Janice Collar had built a wall, a symbol of her power, but she had built it on land she didn't own. And now, the man she had sought to control was about to buy the very ground her assertion of power stood upon. This was no longer just about access to the lake. This was about ownership, strategy, and a masterful turning of the tables. The escalation had just taken a truly unexpected turn. The purchase of Parcel 4B was executed with swift, quiet precision. Margaret, leveraging her old network, expedited the title search and transfer. The elderly couple, unaware of the land's strategic significance, were delighted to sell the forgotten strip for a sum that, while not insignificant to Carter, was a pittance compared to the leverage it now afforded him. Within a week, the deed was in Carter Vaughn's name. He now legally owned the very ground upon which Janice Collar's symbol of power, the formidable fence and its gleaming padlock, stood. The revelation of this hidden truth was about to initiate a dramatic shift in power. Carter decided against a grand, public unveiling. He preferred a more surgical strike, a precise application of pressure, much like releasing water from a dam to scour away an obstruction. The next Saturday morning, just as the early risers of the community were beginning their routines, Carter and Eli, accompanied by Margaret, walked towards the fence line. Eli carried a small, brand-new tackle box, its contents an unspoken promise. As they approached, a patrol car, unmistakably Officer Dean's, pulled up. Dean stepped out, his expression wary. "Mr. Vaughn, I hope there's no trouble. Remember our conversation about respecting HOA property?" "No trouble at all, officer," Carter said, his voice calm, almost cordial. He held up a freshly laminated document. "In fact, I'm simply here to assert my property rights." Dean's brow furrowed as he eyed the document. Just then, Janice Collar's black SUV screeched to a halt behind the patrol car. She emerged, her face a mask of annoyance, then recognition, which quickly morphed into a furious glare. She must have been alerted by a neighborhood watch member, or more likely, had been watching through her own binoculars. "What is the meaning of this?" "Mr. Vaughn," Janice demanded, her voice shrill, "are you attempting to tamper with HOA property again?" "Officer Dean, I insist you arrest him." "There will be no arrests, Mr. Collar," Margaret interjected, stepping forward, her demeanor radiating quiet authority. "Unless, of course, you intend to arrest Mr. Vaughn for standing on his own land, or for removing an illegal structure from it." Janice scoffed. "His own land? Don't be ridiculous, Margaret. This is HOA common property. We have the surveys. We have the legal opinions." "Do you, Margaret challenged, a subtle, knowing smirk playing on her lips. "Then perhaps your legal counsel overlooked Parcel 4B, the narrow strip of land running from the main road directly to Mr. Vaughn's lakefront property, encompassing precisely where your fence and padlock are currently located." Janice's confident facade wavered. "Parcel 4B? What are you talking about? That's common area." "No, Miss Collar," Carter stated. holding up the deed for Dean and Janice to see. As of 3 days ago, Parcel 4B is my property. I bought it, all of it, the entire path you have built your fence on. A stunned silence fell over the small group. Officer Dean took the deed from Carter, his eyes scanning the official stamps and signatures. His jaw dropped. He looked at the fence, then at the deed, then at Janice. A slow realization dawning on his face. The HOA's legal advice had been fundamentally flawed. Or, more accurately, Janice had been operating on a faulty premise. Janice Collar's face turned an unhealthy shade of crimson. That's impossible. This is a trick that land has always been common property. It's an old, forgotten deed, a relic. It's not valid. Oh, it's very valid. Ms. Collar, Margaret said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Signed, sealed, and delivered by the county recorder's office. You built your fence, your safety initiative, your beautification project, on land that is now legally owned by Mr. Carter Vaughn, which means your fence, your signs, and your padlock are all trespassing on private property. Officer Dean cleared his throat, handing the deed back to Carter. Ms. Collar, the deed appears to be legitimate. If Mr. Vaughn indeed owns this parcel, then the fence is technically on his property. You would need to remove it. Remove it, Janice shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering. This is outrageous. This is a deliberate act of sabotage. He's trying to undermine my authority. You undermined your own authority, Ms. Collar, Carter said calmly, his eyes fixed on hers, by attempting to restrict access to property you didn't own, and by harassing a law-abiding citizen. Just then, Rick and Dana Hallman, alerted by the commotion, arrived, their cameras openly recording. Rick had his phone, Dana a small, professional-looking camera. They had been steadily building a following, documenting the HOA's increasingly stringent rules and Janice's heavy-handed tactics. Their presence, now a visible counterforce, unnerved Janice further. Get those cameras out of my face, Janice yelled, flailing a hand at them. We have a right to document public events, Ms. Collar, Rick said, his voice steady. Especially when they involve community disputes. The scene was rapidly becoming a spectacle. Other neighbors, drawn by the raised voices, began to emerge from their homes, peering curiously. Whispers started to spread like wildfire. Carter bought the land. The HOA doesn't own that path. Janice put the fence on his property. The momentum had completely shifted. Janice, once the unassailable authority, was now visibly reeling, exposed and cornered. Her carefully constructed narrative of community improvement was crumbling before everyone's eyes. Carter, seizing the moment, pulled a large pair of bolt cutters from a canvas bag he'd been carrying. The metallic clang as he opened them echoed in the sudden silence. Mr. Vaughn, what do you think you're doing? Officer Dean asked, stepping slightly forward, though his tone lacked its previous firmness. I am removing an unauthorized structure from my private property, Carter stated, his voice ringing with quiet resolve. He walked directly to the padlock, its cold steel a mocking reminder of Janice's control. He inserted the jaws of the cutters around the shackle. You lay one hand on that lock. Mr. Vaughn, and I'll call the sheriff. This is vandalism, Janice screamed, desperation creeping into her voice. Actually, Miss Collar, Margaret said, stepping close to Janice, her voice a low, chilling whisper. It's not vandalism when it's your own property. And speaking of legal action, I believe Mr. Vaughn also has a strong case for trespass, damages, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Given your sustained harassment and illegal obstruction of his property, we can pursue that, or you can step aside and let him remove your illegal structure. Carter, ignoring Janice's increasingly frantic protests, squeezed the handles of the bolt cutters. With a sharp, decisive crack, the padlock burst open, its pieces scattering on the asphalt. Eli let out a small gasp of awe, then a triumphant grin. Carter pushed open the section of the fence where the gate had been, creating a wide, unobstructed path. He then began systematically, calmly, cutting the zip ties and fasteners holding the remaining sections of the fence. Each snip was a symbolic dismantling of Janice's overreach. Officer Dean, after a moment of internal debate, simply watched, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. He knew a lost cause when he saw one. Janice Collar stood frozen, utterly humiliated. The power she had so gleefully wielded had just been turned against her. Not by brute force, but by a quiet, strategic countermove that exposed her arrogance and incompetence. Her face was contorted in a mask of impotent rage and disbelief. The fence, her monument to control, was coming down, piece by painful piece. At the hands of the man she had sought to dominate, the hidden truth was revealed, and the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The sharp, echoing crack of the padlock breaking resonated far beyond the immediate vicinity of the fence, a symbolic detonation that shattered Janice Collar's carefully constructed reign of control. As Carter systematically dismantled the remaining sections of the chain-link barrier, each snip of the bolt cutters felt like a liberation. Eli, his face beaming, rushed to his grandfather's side, helping him pull away the now useless segments of fence. The air, once thick with tension, began to fill with a palpable sense of relief from the onlookers. Officer Dean, after a moment of silent consideration, walked over to Janice, who stood rigid, her eyes darting frantically between the dismantling fence and the growing crowd of neighbors. "Ms. Collar," Dean said, his voice now entirely devoid of deference, "I advise you to remove the rest of your property from Mr. Vaughn's land immediately. Failure to do so will result in a trespass complaint." Janice, stunned, could only stammer. Her authority, built on flimsy legal pretexts and sheer intimidation, had crumbled in spectacular fashion. The Hallman's cameras captured every detail: Janice's horrified expression, Carter's methodical dismantling, the neighbors' hushed exclamations turning into open expressions of support. This footage, raw and compelling, would soon be the final nail in the coffin of Janice's public standing. The story of the lake engineer versus the HOA tyrant exploded online. Rick and Dana Hallman's video, initially a local curiosity, went viral. News outlets picked it up, drawn by the David and Goliath narrative, the clear visual evidence of overreach, and the satisfying climax of Carter cutting the lock. The local news ran segments, then regional, then national. Janice Collar became a caricature of an overbearing HOA president, her name synonymous with petty tyranny. The HOA itself faced intense scrutiny, with numerous residents now emboldened to come forward with their own grievances about Janice's punitive rules and opaque financial decisions. The legal fallout for Janice was swift and severe. Margaret Ruiz, having meticulously documented every instance of harassment, every threat in the clear violation of Carter's property rights, wasted no time. While Carter, true to his nature, initially hesitated to press charges, the public outcry and the sheer audacity of Janice's actions compelled him to move forward. The HOA's legal counsel, faced with overwhelming evidence and a public relations nightmare, quickly distanced themselves from Janice, advising the board to issue a public apology to Carter Vaughn and to rectify the situation immediately. The board, already facing an internal revolt, called an emergency meeting. Janice, stripped of her perceived power and facing a no-confidence vote, tried to defend herself, citing good intentions and misinterpretation of old records. But her words rang hollow, drowned out by the chorus of angry residents and the undeniable photographic and video evidence. Within days, Janice Collar was formally impeached and removed from her position as HOA president. Her grand plans for re-envisioning the lake shattered. The community, tired of her authoritarian grip, elected new, more community-minded leadership. The change was immediate. The new HOA board, eager to repair relations and restore trust, not only formally apologized to Carter, but also offered to reimburse him for the purchase of Parcel 4B. Carter, ever gracious, declined the reimbursement but suggested that the funds be used to create proper, well-maintained public access points to the lake for all residents. including a small, dedicated fishing pier for children. It was a gesture that solidified his standing as a quiet leader. Not just a victor, life by the lake returned to its former rhythm, but with a renewed appreciation. Carter and Eli resumed their Saturday morning fishing trips, the path to the lake now wide open, no longer a symbol of conflict, but of freedom regained. The first time they walked down, Eli sprinted ahead, casting his line into the water with unbridled joy. Carter watched him, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He had not just won a legal battle, he had defended a legacy, a way of life. The story of Carter Vaughn resonated deeply within the community and beyond. It became a cautionary tale for those who sought to wield power arbitrarily and an inspirational beacon for those who felt stifled by bureaucracy and overreach. His quiet determination, coupled with Margaret's legal prowess and the Hallmans' unexpected role as chroniclers, proved that truth, when given a platform, could dismantle even the most formidable barriers. Officer Dean, now a frequent, friendly presence during his patrols, often stopped by Carter's property, not for surveillance, but for a friendly chat. He had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of independent judgment and not blindly following perceived authority. He saw Carter not as a nuisance, but as a pillar of the community, a man who, when pushed, stood firm for what was right. The lake, once a point of contention, became a symbol of unity. Residents, inspired by Carter's stand, became more engaged in HOA affairs, ensuring that future leadership would serve the community, not dictate to it. The shared access points thrived, and the spirit of mutual respect returned. Carter Vaughn, the retired hydraulic engineer, had fixed the flow, not of water but of justice, restoring balance to a community that had briefly lost its way. He found his greatest satisfaction not in the roar of triumph, but in the gentle splash of Eli's fishing line breaking the calm surface of Lake Willow Creek, a sound that finally felt free again. His sanctuary, once threatened, was now more secure than ever, a testament to the quiet power of a man who simply refused to be fenced in. Carter Vaughn's battle wasn't just for a lake, it was for the principle of rightful ownership against overreaching authority. His courage, backed by community and legal brilliance, reminds us that even the most formidable barriers can fall. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey. If Carter's story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of triumph over adversity.